life was relatively normal suburban life up until I was about 7. And then that's when my parents got divorced. And so my parents divorced or separated when I was 7, officially divorced when I was 8. My dad got remarried right away. And their divorce was really hard on me because I was kind of like the middle person between them. They didn't want to talk to each other, so they used me as a 8-year-old. And when my mom got remarried, the man she married presented himself as a good guy. He volunteered at church stuff. He was like a builder. He was one of those, what do they call it, a wolf in sheep's clothing. It only got worse. The abuse started with him when I was 13 and went until I was 17. And I thought I was protecting my younger sister by kind of just putting up with it, that maybe if I put up with it, he wouldn't go after her, and that wasn't totally true. Yeah, they got married right before I turned 12, so their marriage was only going for about a year before the abuse started. For me, the abuse started at 13, and I told her, I was like, I don't think he's a good guy, like I don't think he's the one you should marry.
When the child experiences any form of abuse, right, it's very, very impactful in relationships, but especially sexual abuse. So a child naturally is trusting of people. You can see this with little children. But when abuse happens, it destroys that sense of trust. And so if that is the foundation of their life, trust, you can imagine as they grow up, they're not going to have that trust in other people.
It definitely affected my self-esteem. And then honestly, it made me seek out negative forms of attention. Because I had attempted to tell my mom at the age of 15, so that was 2 years into the abuse. And then I think once I got shut down, in my head, nobody would believe me at that point. If my own mom doesn't believe me, nobody else is gonna believe me. I struggled in high school with definitely feelings of wanting to hurt myself. But in my head, especially during my teen years when I was being abused, if anything happened to me, my younger sister and my younger stepsister would automatically have to take my place in the abuse. And in my head, that was my way of protecting them, was making sure I was around and I was okay.
So there is a strong relationship between childhood sexual abuse and then depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric disorders later on in life. In a meta-analysis where they had over 3 million participants, they found that there was an increase of over 2-fold risk of depression and major depression, and almost a 3-time fold. And then as far as anxiety disorders, there's a 3 times increased risk of developing some sort of anxiety disorders.
What a lot of people experience when they are traumatized as a kid is what I call an emotional freezing period, is you literally emotionally freeze at the age that the trauma happened, and you don't emotionally mature. You may obviously chronologically mature, but when you get triggered in the future, your most primitive reaction is going to go back to the earliest trauma.
Oftentimes there's 2 pathways when it comes to relationships for individuals who had childhood trauma. Either they don't trust at all, or they're overly trusting. Now people might be confused about that. Why would they be overly trusting if people did, or a person or people did something bad to them? Is because they're hoping that they can regain that trust. They're hoping that they can find somebody to love them, and so they will open themselves up to anybody who will love them. And what's really rooted in that is a low sense of self-worth.
I always knew I wanted to get married. Unfortunately, I didn't pick the best partner. We have since divorced. I had a feeling that if I didn't work on myself enough, I probably would not pick the right partner.
A lot of times when people have been abused, they don't understand from a real deep way of where it's okay to say no, because they were not allowed to say no in certain situations. And so then it's difficult for them to say no to other people in the future. And this often leads to then being re-traumatized by more abuse in one way or another.
My self-esteem was so low that I actually was with him for almost 9 years because I figured that no one else was gonna love me and no one else would want me. So I stuck around for way longer than I should have.
Trauma impacts the way you view yourself. I'm damaged. Sexual abuse especially. I'm damaged forever. I'm dirty. I'm worthless. I'm not good enough. And so those beliefs about yourself will then impact your relationship. If I think I'm worthless, then I'm going to treat myself as worthless, and I'm going to allow people to treat me as worthless. If I think that I'm dirty and I'm damaged forever, then I also would allow people in my relationships to treat me that way. So it could either impact from a place of how I view people or how I view myself, and oftentimes both.
Now this is just my assumption, but it was kind of like once we signed the marriage certificate, he could treat me however he wanted because he knew I wouldn't leave him. And I mean, we did have good times, but there was a lot of, like, he would say things to me like, you need me, you're nothing without me, you need my money, you need my job.
What abuse does is your body is your #1 boundary. And so when that gets sexually violated, it tends to throw off all concepts of all your other boundaries.
And so really learning what healthy boundaries look like and how to implement those is very important. And then another piece that I think is almost equally as important is also learning, what does a safe person look like? Because, you know, through the process of abuse, obviously that wasn't a safe person, but unfortunately, if we didn't have close relationships with people that were really psychologically safe for us, then it's difficult for us to identify who is okay to open up to and to be vulnerable.
When we talk about trauma, you know, we have to think about what are those things in the world that we face or experience that can cause us some fear and a fear kind of response to them. So looking at it, it's kind of a stress-related type of what I would say experience. And with trauma, we have these kind of reactions to them. So it could be if we directly experience the trauma situation, it's happening to us, or we're witnessing it happen to someone else, or it's being repeated to us. It could be like a war situation or sexual assault, or seeing someone else being traumatized. All of these have an impact on how we perceive them, our histories based on what we've experienced, and then we kind of have a response to them.
He had an affair with actually someone I considered a best friend at the time. And it was only 6-7 months into our marriage that the affair started. So it was a big hit to my self-esteem. And my ex loved to remind me that something must be wrong with me because we weren't happy.
So the frontal lobe is responsible for, decision making, executive functioning, planning, and other things. But one of the things it evaluates truth. So if you come and you tell a child you're stupid, a child is more susceptible and vulnerable to believe I am stupid because their frontal lobe is not developed to say, no, I'm not, right? And so when it happens to them, when a trauma happens to them and it makes them, start believing I'm worthless, I'm at fault for this. And a common experience for childhood trauma, which is super, super sad, is they believe they're at fault. And a perpetrator will often silence the victim by shame and make them believe that.
They feel like I must have done something to deserve the abuse. Maybe I dressed too provocatively, or maybe I was doing this or that. And it's so important that people realize, you know what? It's not your fault. It is not your fault that you were abused. That was a horrible choice that someone made, and they are responsible. And then the fear, just the fear of being vulnerable to somebody and sharing, like, how is this person that maybe I'm trying to get help from, how are they going to think of me? Are they going to support me? Is it going to be safe to be vulnerable? Are they going to be dismissive of my concerns? Are they going to validate and support me? Are they just going to listen to me? Am I going to open up and be vulnerable? And then I'm not going to receive the real help that I need.
It's not just the event that's really hard for people to cope with. Most people actually that endure trauma, they are able to recover within the first month. But the part that makes trauma really hard to deal with is the narrative, the meaning we give it. So if I'm, a victim of abuse, and I'm like, that was not my fault, it happened to me, that person made a terrible decision, I'm gonna cope well. But if I believe it was my fault, it was because I did this, I didn't, fight back, that narrative is I'm gonna carry for the rest of my life and think there's something wrong with me, which almost makes me the perpetrator. And I walk around with myself everywhere I go, and so trauma follows me wherever I go.
Before, it used to be associated with more specific incidents, being a soldier in a war, or some kind of sexual assault, or a natural disaster trauma. Now it seems to be expanding a little bit more, where now we have people saying, okay, I've been bullied, now I've been traumatized. So it's actually expanding in what trauma is compared to what originally started off with.
I'm not sure if I can keep going with the feelings I'm having, the feelings of self-doubt, the image issues, the confidence issues. I always remind myself, like, look how far you've come. Because I had a very negative thoughts towards my body for a very long time. Whether it was my body because it was abused, whether my body wasn't good enough for my ex-husband. I had a lot of negative feelings and then I was bullied growing up to, like, cherry on top of all of it. So, hiking made me realize I can carry myself up a mountain. I can carry myself and my things up a mountain when I'm determined enough. So if my body can do that, then between my mental health and my body, I can keep going and I can keep working on my healing process.
An external barrier might be that it's often difficult to find the right therapist. There's a lot of nuances there. For example, if someone was sexually abused by a male, maybe doing therapy with a male would not be a good idea because that could be a big trigger.
I always get that, I'm so sorry you went through that, I'm so sorry this happened to you, and I know they are coming from a good place, and I know they mean well, but it's very hard to respond to that because honestly my upbringing is what made me who I am. It made me resilient, it made me determined, it strengthened my relationship with God, and it made me realize that I want to use it to help people. So I appreciate the fact that people are sorry that I ever went through that, but I wouldn't be the person I am today without my upbringing, the good and the bad.
Also making sure that individuals are not isolating, but they're getting the support that they need from trusted either therapists or friends, family, other church members.
My process of healing has definitely been church and my relationship with God. It has also been my friends.
Faith and God's word is extremely powerful when it comes to healing any trauma, any mental health difficulties, but especially sexual trauma. And one of the main factors to that is our self-worth and our self-value. Most of us, we struggle with our identity because we attribute our worth to what we do, right? We do this, in society at large. But the Bible teaches a profound truth, that your value has nothing to do with what you do, or as well as nothing to do with what was done to you. And so you see a constant narrative throughout the Bible of, I knew you before you were born. You were created in His image, not only by creation, but then by redemption. So even if you doubt, right, if you're creating God's image, it's like, well, he bought you back. How much does a product have value? And it's often by like how it's designed, the materials, which is creation, but also how much someone is willing to pay for it. So redemption tells you you are priceless.
Do not let this define you. Do not let this decide what your future looks like. You can work hard and come out the opposite of what statistics say a lot of us should come out as. You can be whatever you want to be. You can grow up and have the job you want to have. You can have the family you want to have. And so being able to help other people and share my story has been a huge part of my healing process, but I also have a very good support system. You have to give yourself grace, and finding your path through life is never going to be straight, especially if you've had trauma. But giving yourself grace and understanding that you've been through a lot and that it's not always easy to come out of that, but that you can do it is huge.